Hey guys, Dave here. Welcome to Centurion's review, the punk rock band of wargame review institutions. This is Clavius from Carrie Anderson. I believe it's published under Microgame Design Group. They're an outfit out of Canada that sells microgames. The story behind this is he had submitted this game to Task Force Games in the 1980s. I believe it was the early 1980s. And they came out with a game called Base Clavius based on, and it was a significant departure from his original rules. So he's re-released it, and it's in production right now with the original rules and also some new optional rules. So we're going to go over the differences between this and the old game. If you want to see what the old game was like, click on the link in the top right of the screen, and that will take you to the old video so you can see what the original game was like. So one of the differences is the sequence of play. Before it was combat and then movement, which I didn't particularly like, but here it has movement and then combat for the Russian player, which I do like, and militia formation phase, then movement, and then combat. Militia formation phase is a new thing. Starting the second turn in the regular game, or I think after the sixth turn in the campaign game, during the militia formation phase, you draw one of these out of the cup for each colony. And if it's one like this, you put it on the colony, which would be right here. Assuming you have enough room to put it there. This one would actually be overstacked, so let's just pretend I didn't stack it completely. But you can also draw a no militia unit, and if that happens, you don't put a militia out for that colony, you just throw the no militia back in the cup. So that's new to this game. Movement is similar than in the original. If you're a airborne unit, which is basically most of them except for like the SPBs and stuff, anything with a movement factor of 10 is a airborne unit. When they move, they ignore terrain, they just pay one movement point. However, if they're moving into an enemy zone of control, that hex they have to pay the regular ground movement. I believe in the original version you just paid one extra, so that's slightly different. And stacking's slightly different in this too. It's still a stacking limit of 3, and then SPBs and I think landing craft or something, LCs I think they're called, those you can stack up to 4. However, in the advanced rules you can choose to, with the advanced rules you can choose to use the ones you want and not use the ones you don't want. You can choose to use the stacking advanced rule where you can have unlimited stacking. Right, as far as the transportation lines here, which is basically an underground subway or something like that, you would use half your movement to move onto the transportation line, and then you can go anywhere in the transportation network for 0 movement points. And let's say you went to this point, and then you could spend the other half of your movement points moving away from it. So that's slightly different than before. Alright, as far as destroying a transportation line, a Russian unit either can move directly onto the transportation line, and then that's considered, that part in that hex is destroyed, or they can use bombardment fire with a mortar or something and if they get a hit, it will destroy the transportation line. They can also do damage to any troops that are in there. That's if you're using one of these nuclear mortars here. Alright, combat. Combat's different than in the original one. So let's say these were having combat here, and the Russians here are the attacker, and the American is the defender. The defender always fires first, but however, if you're on defender fire first terrain, that means not only do you fire first, but any casualties you inflict as the defender to the attacker, those may not fight back. So as you can see, there's all different combat effects for the different terrain you're in. They're in rough terrain there, so there's no effect. So this would be 5, 10, 15. And you don't worry about what the strength of the enemy is in this. So you just go to the 14 table then, and you'd roll 2 dice, and this tells you the number of units you killed. There's one caveat to that though. In some terrain, defending infantry losses count as 2. So if you inflict 2 casualties on those infantry, and they kill one of them, that will count as 2, so they just take 1 casualty. As far as nuclear mortar and combat, those have a range of 2, and they're just added to the combat strength. You don't have the crazy formula they had in the Task Force Games version, so it's much easier to use in this. And there's another unit that can shoot 2 hexes. It's the SPB here. That does a damage of 10. And it can only fire defensively. For the last scenario, there's laser rifles the Marines are using. Those that gain the advantage of first fire on both attack and defense, with the exception of attacking units in the defender first fire situation, in which case they fire simultaneously, so laser rifles are good. And it's got special Marine landing rules here too. Let's go to the advanced rules now. As far as the advanced rules, like I said, these you can mix and match as you wish. If you don't like one of them, you don't have to use it if you're playing advanced rules. So the first thing that changes is the sequence of play. It's still Russian movement, then Russian combat, and then there's a Russian oxygen check phase. And essentially, they're checking to see if they're adjacent to either a colony they control or a depot they control. Most of the time the Americans control those, or next to a rocket battery. A rocket battery can provide oxygen. If they're not, they get a counter on them, an oxygen counter, and if on the next turn they're not adjacent to oxygen, again the unit is destroyed. And then as far as the American player turn, it's militia formation, movement phase, combat phase, and then an oxygen check phase. Alright, in the advanced game, units no longer need to cease movement when they enter an enemy zone of control, but may continue moving, paying the ground movement cost for each enemy zone of control hex entered. Alright. There are no stacking limits in the advanced game. Oh, and I forgot to mention in the basic game, there's overrun rules. Back to the basic rules. As far as overruns, it's moving a stack of units into an enemy unit's hex. They must begin the movement phase stacked together. After the resolution, any surviving units may continue moving or continue to overrun the surviving defenders. That's if they have enough movement points. So to resolve it, first the overrunning stack moves next to this target defender player stack, and then expends any costs necessary to enter the enemy zone of control. The overrunning units initiate the overrun by moving into the defender's hex, expending the 1 air movement point cost. When entering the defender's hex, all enemy zones of control are ignored. And the combat's resolved with a -2 die roll modifier against the overrunning units. The defender gets normal terrain advantages. If the defender survives the overrun, the overrunning units return to the hex they came from, and they can attack again if they have enough movement points. And there's one last thing I forgot. There's Desperation Fire in this. During the combat phase, any defending troops may conduct a Desperation Fire by rolling 1 die on the combat results table instead of 2. All units in the stack must conduct Desperation Fire, and the decision to conduct Desperation Fire must be announced before any die rolls are rolled. After firing, the unit has exhausted its ammunition and is removed from play. Alright, as far as the difference in the overrun rules, units with 0 combat strength can be overrun when alone in defender first fire terrain. They must still suffer a loss to be removed. And as far as nuclear mortar fire, they've changed it back to like the original in the advanced rules, sorta, a little bit like their original. When a nuclear mortar bombards a hex, subtract a dice roll the number of units in the target hex. And then there's rocket buses added to some of the scenarios here, and also DDs. We'll get to those in a second. That's orbital ground support. Basically, the way that works is you have one of these DD units, and you, once a turn, if you're American, you place it on top of a Soviet unit, and then it gets to attack with a strength of 10, and afterwards it goes back and you're moving from the board. It's still in orbit. And the last relevant thing in the advanced rules is collateral damage. If you fire a nuclear mortar into a structure such as a colony or a depot, there's a chance that it can destroy that facility, and if it does destroy it, that does not count towards victory conditions. So generally the victory conditions are in this are you have to control a certain number of colonies for each scenario and a certain number of depots. But yeah, those are the advanced rules, and so you see this is significantly different than Base Clavius. Len and I will do our review portion now. Hey guys, Dave and Len here. We just played Clavius. Kerry Anderson, who's the author of the game, sent it to me. He saw our review of Base Clavius and so sent me the new version, which is just called Clavius. The story is on the original version, which he submitted to Task Force Games. They significantly changed how the game was, so he's basically reprinted it with the original rules plus some optional rules. The basic game, some of the differences with this one is it's got a different combat results table, and it doesn't have the goofy calculations for the mortars anymore. It's much simpler. And some of the optional rules it has is you now have oxygen rules where you have to be near an oxygen supply. And if you're away from an oxygen supply for 2 turns, you're dead. So first turn you're away from it, you get a counter. Second turn you just died of oxygen starvation. But yeah, the scenarios are essentially pretty similar to the first one. There's some new units like rocket batteries and so forth, and I like the way the self-propelled batteries work better in this one too. They're pretty powerful and stuff. What'd you think of this one compared to the original one?
I seem to enjoy this one better.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not quite sure, because I do have, actually, strangely enough, I got a number of complaints about this one. But for some reason, I actually enjoy this game.
Yeah, I like it. The original one I rated as somewhere between fair and good. I rate this one as a solid good. What are some of the things you didn't like about this one?
This unlimited stacking.
Yeah, well, that was an optional rule that we chose to use. You can actually, if you use the basic rules, you have the usual stacking limit of 3, but you can have a stacking limit of 4 if you have a landing craft or a self-propelled battery, but we chose to use the unlimited stacking, which seems to be more in the favor of the Americans since you're defending, and there's no retreats in the game. So if you just put, the Americans put stacks of like 8 units in there, the Russians were going to have to kill like at least 2 a turn most of the time in order to get rid of the stack. So usually the Russians are going to run out of time because it's a turn limit of 6.
Yeah, because the problem with stacking, of course, it's all falling over.
Right, in that aspect, it reminded me a little of Starship Troopers, a game that I like, but where stacks are constantly falling over.
Yeah, so I remember I started, like, I think having this overwhelming force, but after a few turns next to the bases I'm supposed to get, or I'm losing like about 2 to 4 a turn.
Yeah,
and he's losing only 1 or 2 at the most.
One thing I forgot to mention is there's overrun rules in this, so you can do an overrun attacks during your movement phase and then do regular combat too if you still have units left. We found that the overruns work best if you're trying to overrun a weak force, like there's only 2 counters in the hex or something. If you're trying to overrun a hex with like 6 counters, and you're just going to get your butt kicked by defensive fire.
Yeah.
So, and you can do more than one overrun per turn if you have sufficient movement points too.
Yeah, because that's the thing is, I tried it first in 1 turn and lost a lot of units, and that's probably the turning point. And the only time I used it was on the second last turn, which a few bases had like 1 or 2 units left. So, and of course you had the rocket bus that you could, when that's the only one left, you spend 2 movement points just to bump it off. So it slows you down.
One other thing I forgot to mention about this game is there's defensive fire and regular fire. So whenever you attack something, the defenders fire first, and then you fire. And if it's defender fire first train, that means not only do they fire first, but whatever casualties they inflict on the attacker, the attacker does not get to fire back with that unit that was killed if it's defender fire first terrain.
Yeah. Well, all said that I was the attacker, and if I had about if I had 2 more turns, I would have won.
Right. Yeah.
So and I felt like the only problem really with this one was that I wasn't sure about the combat table, so I wasn't sure how to allot my forces for the attack, because I was thinking I could probably spend the first 2 turns attacking other spots and just wearing them down. So, but I had 6 turns, and it's a rough one.
One thing I like about this is the Americans have an orbital bombardment capability. They have something called a destroyer, which I guess is something in orbit, and once per turn you can attack a stack with it, so that was kind of cool. But my only major complaint about this, well, if I was to, next time I play this, I'll probably do it with without the unlimited stacking, with the regular stacking, which I prefer. My only complaint is the combat results table is better than the one they had before, but my complaint about it is it only supports up to a combat strength of 30. So there's instances where he had probably like 70 or 80 combat strength points near my stack, but you can only, the combat results table only goes up to 30, so he wasn't able to take advantage of that, so that hurt the Russians.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, overall I thought it was good. Do you think it was good?
Better than the other version.
Cool. All right, we'll have a new review for you guys next week. Thanks for watching.
I think that.